Hilda. It's a pretty cool show, yeah? Despite its moderate popularity, I would still consider it to be quite an underrated show. Yeah, it's over now. Kinda sad. Let's talk about that. Yeah, Hilda Season 3 released about a month ago at the time of recording this, and I thoroughly enjoyed it, and I wanted to talk about it here today. Before jumping straight into Season 3 though, I wanted to talk about just Hilda as a show in general, and why I find it to be so different from other shows. Hilda truly feels like a breath of fresh air compared to so many other shows. It is released by Netflix, so unfortunately it doesn't have the opportunity to have a lot of hype centered around the show. In my opinion, and I think a lot of people would agree with me, shows that release their episodes weekly as opposed to just uploading them all so you can binge them all in one sitting, I find those release schedules to be a lot more hype, and I really wish Hilda had that same opportunity, because it would have been really cool to see a lot of the mysteries leading up to the finale of Season 3. But the show itself is very, very refreshing. The art style is absolutely adorable. The animation style is adorable. It feels so smooth and buttery. The color palette of the world fits so well. Like, it's adapted from the comics amazingly. The characters are really fun. The story is really cool. But I think what entices me most about Hilda is the world building, because there's so much of it. And the sad thing is it feels like it could still be expanded on so much, right? It feels like we've only scratched the surface, and we've already seen 3 seasons of the show. There's so many plot points and things that show up in Hilda that kind of just have loose ends, although it feels like they don't even really need to be tied. I don't know. It's just so many things that just kind of get shoved in your face, like, yeah, this exists, by the way, this exists, and then it's never brought up again. A good example of this is in episode 3 of season 3, Hilda goes into this tree, a magical tree that's actually just a time machine, and can like pretty much send her to different dimensions and alternate worlds. And then guess what? At the end of the episode, the tree burns down, and it's like, okay, cool. That could have been, you know, a plot point that, you know, took up an entire season, but it was like 1 episode, and it's like, why is that a thing? And this one character that has been throughout the entire show, like, apparently just takes care of it the whole time. It's just like, I don't understand, man. I don't understand how this show just has absolutely insane ideas and world building, and they're just deciding to end it now. It doesn't feel right, honestly. It really doesn't feel right. It feels like the show has just gotten started, and it's the end. Now, when you start watching season 3, you're gonna notice right away, just off the first episode, that the characters have actually grown a little bit. You know, while I was watching the theme song, I was like, huh, these characters feel taller. They feel bigger. They feel like they've grown up a little bit. And that's definitely true. If you compare like the season 1 intro with the season 3 intro, you can definitely see that these characters are growing up. And this is another good example of why I was a little bit sad to see them grow up in this season, and then it's just like, oh, now that's just taken away from us, right? We see these characters are growing and still stepping into their own elements, and yet we just don't really get to see them continue to grow, I suppose. But the first episode opens up with Hilda and the gang taking a train to Tofton to visit their great aunt Astrid. And this episode does a really good job of easing us into the plot of this season, taking place around the mystery of fairies. The episode also does a very good job of introducing us to the new major character of Astrid, which is Hilda's great aunt and Joanna's aunt who raised her. She really gives off these sweet old grandma vibes, which I really enjoyed right from the very start, but she also has a lot of mystery surrounding her as well. Plus, her relationship to Joanna and Hilda are very, very nice, especially with Joanna. There's such a rich history between the two of them that just oozes out whenever they speak together. Their dialogue together is absolutely amazing, which is the case for most Hilda characters, especially with those who have pre-established backgrounds that we don't really know about, but kind of get to pick up on through the dialogue and character interactions. So yeah, I like Astrid. She's a very cool addition to the Hilda cast. I also really enjoyed the location of Tofton as well. It's like some little town far off away from Trollberg, and I really appreciated getting to expand on the world a bit more with like other human cities, because we didn't really get that many opportunities to see other civilizations of like humans banded together, right? We've seen lots of different races throughout the show, where they live and how they do things, but it feels like a lot of the humans, like the main characters in the show, they're all sort of just centered in the big city of Trollberg. The location not only held very sentimental meaning toward Hilda and her family, but it was also just a very beautiful location as well. There's just one scene where Joanna and Astrid are, I think they're just dipping their feet in the water, like by a little creek in the village, and it's such a beautiful scene. Like everything there is just, it's so beautiful. And that's not even touching on the fact that there is a whole other world here with the fairy mound. The fairies and their lore is the biggest thing that season 3 covers. It's like that's the main big juicy steak of season 3. So I'll talk about that in just a minute. But there was one other major character introduced in season 3 that I really didn't expect to see coming, and that was Hilda's father. It's been a minute since I've seen season 1 and 2 of Hilda, as well as the movie, and I feel like the dad was maybe vaguely mentioned. I honestly don't remember, but regardless, seeing him show up was quite a surprise. And while being a very good character, being the sort of irresponsible parent that is never really around, he's extremely underutilized in the show, I feel, because he only has like 2 episodes to really shine. And you can definitely tell that he deeply cares for his family. But again, with like many Hilda characters, there is a lot of background knowledge that we can pick up on through context clues in the dialogue of characters, but we're never given a flat-out answer as to what happened in the past between Joanna and Hilda's dad. But through introducing that character, they were able to put our heroes into motion for the final act, which again, I'll talk about in a minute. And throughout season 3, there are 8 episodes, and 2 of them are basically just filler. I guess you could argue even 3 of them. But episodes 3 and 4 of season 3, they're kind of just filler. Something that you kind of expect to see like in season 2 or maybe season 1 of Hilda. And it was kind of nice to see more slice of life, laid back stuff. And there were very small, minor things happening throughout these episodes that related to the overall plot, such as the strange silhouettes watching over Hilda in every single episode. Besides that, it didn't really connect that well to the overall story, which was fine. It served as its own plot, and it really helped expand the characters and the world building of this show. Now, in particular, there are 4 episodes that I really want to talk about. That being, first off, episode 2, which is when Hilda and her friends get trapped inside of the fairy mound. The fairy mound is basically the gateway to the fairy world. You walk towards it, and then the fairies basically abduct you. Yeah, fairies are like kind of not, I shouldn't say evil, but they're more wicked in this show. They're not your typical, you know, pixie, funny, I'll grant you any wishes, Timmy was an average kid kind of chumps. We're talking the more dark kind of fairy, not your happy-go-lucky fairies here. And I really appreciate the, I want to say almost horror element of the fairies as well. These very mysterious creatures that were flying around while they were stuck inside the fairy mound. It was really cool. And while Hilda and her friends are trapped inside this fairy mound, Astrid and Joanna go to the fairy mound and dig in with shovels, and that somehow rescues them. It's a little strange how the whole thing happens, but the show explains it pretty well. It's kind of guarded by these little charms that Astrid made, and whenever you remove the charms, that's when the fairies can abduct you into their world. And the only way to get you out is by digging them out from this like physical mound that connects the worlds together. And throughout the first 2 episodes, Hilda is very interested in fairies, trying to get to the bottom of it, like what the heck are up with fairies. All she hears about through the town of Tofton is just a bunch of various rumors that don't really lead anywhere. But Astrid was actually guarding the last fairy mound that was in this location. And this actually upsets Joanna, because in the past she was actually abducted by fairies as well, and was always hesitant to come back to this home of hers because of stuff like that, because she couldn't really trust Astrid. And they actually end up leaving. The whole gang actually ends up leaving Astrid's home due to the fact that it's like, well, now we know that this place isn't safe anymore with the fairy mound being here. Let's just leave. But while in the fairy mound, Hilda actually came into contact with these 2 mysterious figures, which basically watch over her throughout the entire season, and they're pretty mysterious. We don't really know what's going on with them. And it isn't until episode 5 when the silhouettes actually come into play. Episode 5 is the one that introduces Hilda's dad as a character, and they basically go on some shady job thing and get into chaos. It's really funny to see the dad and daughter bonding, seeing how Hilda's dad is a bit more of a wild card, a bit more of an irresponsible one, but also grants Hilda the freedoms that she's always wanted under Joanna's mostly strict rule. It's pretty exciting to see, especially the scene where she tries out driving. But again, after they get into trouble, Hilda's dad is actually pulled into the fairy world by these silhouettes, unbeknownst to both Hilda and Joanna, who are there at the time. And Hilda's dad going missing serves as a great motivator for the final act. But before the final act, there is probably my favorite episode of maybe all time, actually, which is the 6th episode called The Forgotten Lake, which features this very weird creature, like some frog spider creature. And I don't want to like go super in detail with this episode, because you could even argue it's a filler episode. But when it comes to the very intense, life-threatening, and scary parts of Hilda, this episode has it all. It also does a great job of just reinforcing the bonds between Hilda and her mother, which is probably the strongest bond in the show. We've seen them go back and forth all the time, but Hilda and her mother truly are the most engaging characters to have interact with each other. Without going into too much detail about the episode, when they decide to plan some camping trip, things happen, stuff goes wrong, and they decide to camp somewhere else instead, which turns out to be some location that Joanna was brought to in her childhood, which is another good foreshadowing toward the final act, where we see that she remembers this mysterious place that also have some charms littered around the area, similar to ones that Astrid had made. And similar to the fairy mound from Tofton, after removing said charms, this crazy frog spider creature comes out and chases them around the woods, kidnaps Hilda, And this episode is crazily intense. Definitely like the most engaging one to watch in my opinion because of just how scary it is. This giant creature, which they did a really good job of making the creature feeling like extremely threatening from not only its extremely fast movements, but the weight of the creature, how the size of it, and just how fast it was, especially since Joanna was like very terrified of it, but was still trying to rescue her daughter from the freaking nest. And after just trying to run away so much, this creature actually captures Hilda once again. And instead of having Hilda go down alone, Joanna actually decides to let go of the car that they're holding onto, and they both get eaten by the creature, only for it to spit them back out. So it's a bit of a cop-out where it's like, oh no, they didn't escape, but the creature was just like, bleh, actually you taste disgusting. By the way, lore drop, I'm a mysterious creature that's lived here for like ever, and I actually remember you, Joanna. Your freaking aunt sealed me away. Frick her, she's cringe, she's lame. Yeah. And it was a really amazing episode, especially for Joanna, who I personally think is like the shadow main character. She's like the secret main character of the show. The show is called Hilda, but Joanna has, I feel like, the most character development throughout the entire show. After the episode, there is episode 7, which is basically just a bit of a transitional episode. The A plot is pretty similar to what you'd see in season 1 or season 2. It's kind of like a slicer of life thing. But the B plot is related to Hilda trying to find out where her dad has gone. Finds this mysterious radio that keeps giving her weird mixed signals, and at the end of the episode they find out where the signals are all pinpointing to, and of course it's back in Tofton. So in the final episode, Hilda decides to go back into the Fairy Mound to rescue her dad, and she finds her dad on this weird mysterious island along with Victoria Van Gale, which was transported here I believe in the 2nd season, and with help from Frida and David they're able to escape. But as it turns out, Joanna actually went in after them, and now Hilda has to go and find her instead. So while Frida is holding open this magical portal, which by the way, Frida and David actually got some really cool moments here. In fact, every character got a really awesome moment in the finale. I was really happy to see something like that. But Frida was able to use her cool magic powers and David was able to confront his fears. But once again, Hilda returns to the fairy world and actually finds a young version of Joanna. After some adventuring, they actually meet up with the mysterious silhouettes, which turn out to be Joanna's parents, which was quite an interesting revelation that I honestly didn't really see coming, because the mysterious silhouettes always felt like they had some sort of ill intent. But I guess this is kind of how it was framed. You know, it was all just like one big mystery, right? So we didn't really know what their intentions were. And we actually learned that in the past, Joanna was the child of a fairy and a human, and that through some fairy magic deal with the Lord of the Fairy World, they actually had to return back to the fairy world and abandon Joanna in the human realm, while Astrid stayed behind. Astrid is also a fairy, turns out. Pretty interesting stuff. This also makes Hilda really happy to find out that she's like part fairy, and I love the animation when she finds out she's a fairy as well. The animation is so smooth and amazing. Animators, like, they're crazy, dude. Whoever worked on that specific cut, that was beautifully animated. And as for the climax of the final episode, after the whole family comes together, Hilda and Joanna eventually come to the realization that they need to return home, but due to the freaking fairy laws or whatever, they actually can't go back, so they have to try and escape. And through the help of their newfound family, the help of Twig and all of his family who show up to cross dimensions because they can just do that, they're able to get out while Astrid tries to make the ultimate sacrifice by being Joanna's replacement and staying in the fairy world, which we all think is going to happen until Victoria Van Gale actually shows up instead and voluntarily is like, hey, can I be the sacrifice instead? Because she literally wants to stay there and research the fairy world. There's a whole lot of details that goes into it. A lot of interesting world building stuff that goes on that I won't get into, but it's all really fascinating stuff, and it's another reason why I feel like they could have had this season go on for like 3 times as long and it still would have been just as interesting. But, you know, in the ending, they return back to the real world, while Joanna's parents, you know, just will lovingly watch over them from the fairy world, because the fairy world can just watch into the real world using their magic. And we get a beautiful ending segment, getting to look at all the characters in where they are now, seeing what they're up to, which is really cool, honestly. I really appreciate a show going the extra mile to show off callbacks and consistency to other characters, plot points, stories, and whatnot. It was a pretty good resolution, right? It ended all really well. And for a final arc of this show, I think it did really well. I think it was well paced, despite it being over in only 8 episodes. Well, 7 episodes and basically a movie. Yeah, the final episode is like the length of a movie, so that was honestly a nice surprise. The show never really felt like it rushed to its ending, right? It felt like it could have added in 1,000 more plot points, but it didn't really feel that rushed to me. I don't know, I feel like it just went at a really solid pace. I just want to see more, right? I know that's what you say with every single show that you want to see more of, but like with Hilda, it generally feels like there are just so many things that have loose ends that they need to tie up, but it also works that like it doesn't even need to be, right? Because it's constantly introducing new ideas and new things, and you're just like, oh, that's cool. That's really awesome. And somebody like me who loves like really elaborate and interesting worlds. I mean, a great example of this is One Piece. I freaking love One Piece. It has some of the best world building in fiction. And I would say like if Hilda was an ongoing show that just kept on going on and on and on and kept the consistency of its writing and stories and characters, I'd put the world building on par with One Piece. I think it's that good. From its locations to its lore to its creatures and how all of these different things interact, it just makes for such a fascinating world. And I really don't think it deserves to be over. While the show did a really good job of wrapping up everybody's arcs, it still feels like we could have another 3 seasons of the show and they'd still have plenty of stuff to work with. So while the show has ended, I don't know if we'll see any more content on it in the future. There's a lot of shows that end and then come back, so I don't really know if Hilda will be one of those. It doesn't seem like it will be. I might have to check out the comics as well, written by Luke Pearson, and see what the differences are between the show and the comics. I actually do own like the first 6 comics of the series, so I might have to start looking into that. But in conclusion, the final season of Hilda did not disappoint. They introduced 2 new fascinating characters that were tied to Hilda's family and lore that we could have seen utilized a lot more in the show, along with this rich world that is ever expanding into new ideas and new places. And I didn't even talk too much on the Fairy Lord, which served as the sort of final boss of the series. Getting to see this mysterious ruler of the fairy world that was practically rotting away and was desperate for more sacrifices and whatnot, it was really fascinating to see, and I feel like they could have done so much more with it. But when the core focus of the show is focused on Hilda and her family, I think the villain served its purpose well, despite me wanting to know so much more about it. I could probably talk a lot more about this season and the things I enjoyed about it, but I don't want this video to go on forever. So now's the time when you let me know your thoughts on the show. I'm very curious to see what all of your thoughts and opinions are about the final season of Hilda. Let me know what your favorite moments of the story were, what your favorite episodes were, what characters are your favorite. I want to know it all. And of course, that will be it for today, everybody. Thank you so very much for watching. I hope you have a great rest of your day. Bye-bye.